Hi, welcome to Session 5, Part 1. Remember about attendance. I know I keep saying that, but we do need to keep track of all of our clients that come to our sessions. And this is an important one because this is the last session before the graduation. And that will be an important part of what you talk about at the end of the day today, to reiterate childcare, transportation, and the time that people need to be there. It is really early. It's 8 o'clock in the morning. For a lot of people, that's early to get there, especially if their transportation picks them up earlier to make sure they're there in Fountain Valley on time. So make sure when you're talking about attendance today that you also talk about the day of graduation, the logistics of that, how they're going to get there, if they need childcare, and what time they should be there. The other thing we always want to remind them of is to please come with their hair clean and themselves clean. And the fact that they do need to make sure that they are wearing underwear and clean underwear. There will be provisions for that, so if we do have a problem, but they will be changing in a dressing room with everyone else, and there will be a lot of different people in there. So just remind them of that they will need to make sure that they're going to be kind of taking their clothes off in a big group room that's a dressing room area where a lot of different people will be. So that's just a good reminder to let them know that. So today's focus in Session 5 is all about interviewing. We've gotten to the point where we've talked about all of these different things, our true colors, business culture, we've gotten our master application, and we've gotten our resume to the point where we feel comfortable with it. And now it's time to practice for that all-important interview once we've accomplished getting our resume in and getting that appointment for the interview. So we do want to talk about that. We'll talk about 2 different types of interviews, or 3 different types actually. We'll talk about the in-person, the phone interview, and even a group interview, which is becoming a lot more common practice now. Then once we've talked about that, we'll talk about the types of questions they'll be asked, traditional and behavioral, and then we'll break into small groups and do some practicing with that and some actual role play on those interviews. So let's start with the interviews themselves, okay? There are several different things that you should do before the client goes in for that all-important interview. And it seems common sense, but we need to make sure we remind the clients. The first thing they need to do is once they get that interview opportunity, is they need to start researching that company. We've had so many people come in into working wardrobes that are applying for different jobs, and they don't know anything about the organization. You can't do that. You can't go into an interview situation and not know anything about the company that you're going to work for. So the first thing they need to do is find access to the internet, do as much research as they possibly can to find out what it is that they do, what's their mission statement, are they growing, is the company growing, and then to be able to look and say, where do I fit into this company and what can I add value to this company and how can I do that? So when those kind of interview questions come up, you'll be prepared to answer those. So the client really needs to have that in the back of their mind first. Also, it's so important to understand the logistics. How long is it going to take me to get there? Should I do a practice run? Will there be traffic? Do I have the proper directions? Do I know the building I'm going to? Is there a suite number? Making sure that they understand when they get that call for the interview or the email that they clarify and confirm back. A lot of times people will think, well, they sent me the email, they know I'm coming. No, they don't. Make sure that you ask your clients to confirm back on the email or confirm back by phone the location, that they will be there, the time, and who are they going to be meeting with. A very important question to ask. With whom will I be meeting the day of the interview? So they'll know how many people, because they'll also want to bring that number of resumes with them. Never walk into an interview with just one copy of your resume. You want to make sure you have enough copies for all of the people that you will be working with that day, and then bring at least 2 or 3 extras to have with you. So that's an important thing on logistics. Do a trial run. We always encourage clients to do a trial run. Make sure you know how to get there and make sure that you're comfortable with that. And then on top of that, give yourself an extra half hour, 40 minutes. Even if you sit in your car and wait, it's better to be there than to be worried about it and to be nervous when you first come in the door. Because remember, you only have one first impression. It takes 6 seconds and someone's going to make an impression. So make sure yours is the best one. You put your best foot forward on that. So get there early. The one thing we do want to suggest, though, is we tell clients this: don't show up more than 10 minutes early. If you're there a half an hour, 30 minutes, 40 minutes early, people aren't ready for you. Even though you're anxious and you want to get started, they have a life in their business, and then they have an appointment set up. They're not ready for you. Get there 10 minutes early, walk in the door, make sure they know you're there and that you're there on time, but not any earlier than that. If you are there earlier, then we suggest to our clients to wait in their car or wait outside somewhere, just so that they're there. Okay, and again, make sure you have all of your documents with you. Many companies will ask for a driver's license. They may ask for a social security card. So make sure that you have all of those things with you. And more importantly, make sure you have a pen. I always suggest to clients that they bring in some sort of a nice notepad. So as soon as they sit down with the interviewer, they can write the names down. I usually have them draw a half circle, and if there's 2 or 3 of them, I put the names in the order of where they're sitting. So that way I can turn to someone and say, oh, yes, Amanda, that was a great question. Thanks for asking that. Or, thank you, Robert, I understand that's a good question too, and let me answer that. By using someone's name, as we've talked about in previous sessions, make them feel important, and also gives them the idea that 1, you're listening to them, and 2, you're a very detail-oriented person. So again, make sure that you have some sort of a notepad, a pen with you when you walk in for that interview. So these are just some of the best practices we like to give our clients before they go in for an interview. So we hope that will work for you to share with the clients in session 5. Now, let's talk about the interviews themselves. Many times before clients are asked to come in for an one-on-one interview or an in-person or group interview, a lot of times it's a phone interview. So an HR person or someone in that department will call and do a phone interview. Now, there's a couple things about the phone interview. The first thing that we say to clients is once you start putting your resume and your master application out into the public forum, make sure that on your cell phone it does not have music. You don't say, yo, this is Barbara. You say, hi, this is Lynn Marie. I'm sorry I'm not here right now. Please leave a message and I'll get back to you. Nothing else. Thank you. And end the message. No children in the background, nothing. Just make sure that your message on your cell phone is professional. So that would be the first step as soon as you start applying for jobs. Second thing is you want to encourage the clients is to actually be aware that every time their phone rings, it could possibly be a job interview or an employer trying to call. So every time they answer the phone, they must answer it in a professional way. Good morning, this is Lynn Marie. Hello, this is Lynn Marie, so that they know they've reached the right person. You're not going to use anything appropriate when you answer that phone, so you really want to encourage that. Now, here's one of the things that we suggest you do. We suggest that the coaches do a mock phone interview as a model. Again, remember how important modeling is. But we suggest you do kind of a bad one and then kind of a good one. So if you're doing that as coaches, one of the things that we do is one coach will be the employer, one coach will be the interviewer, and have the phone ring, and then have crying babies in the background, the client yelling at their children to be quiet, or the TV on too loud, or maybe they're out in traffic, or they start saying something about someone in traffic, kind of giving them the idea in a fun way that this is not the appropriate time to answer the phone and have this phone interview. Now, one of the things that we suggest to clients is if they are not in a good place, is to let it go to voicemail, and then when things calm down and they know they can have time, is to be able to then call the person back and say, if they have to leave a message, say, here's a time that works for me, I hope that works for you, that we can have our phone interview, and then make sure that you stick to that time, and then they can actually then do an appropriate phone interview without interruptions. So even though they're anxious to answer the phone, you really want to encourage the clients to not answer the phone if it's not a good time and there's too much noise or interference going on. So do that kind of mock phone interview. Then we suggest you do the one that's right. So you ask the clients, you just model a few questions that might take place over the phone, and that will come from your sample interview questions, the traditional ones. Most phone interviews will be about the traditional type of questions, just to kind of get down and weed people out. So do a couple of those, model for your clients what that looks like, and give them the idea of a good phone interview, okay? Now, the other kind of interview that we're seeing more and more are group interviews. And group interviews really is an important time to set yourself apart. So we suggest to the clients that they come dressed for that, as appropriate as possible, wearing their best clothes, their suit, because most people thinking that they're coming to a group interview, they don't think they need to dress up because they're meeting with all sorts of people. That's not true. The group interview is where all the employers are looking as quickly as possible as how they can weed people out. So what we suggest is in the group interview, you come in, you're on cue as soon as you walk in the door because you don't know who's going to be taking you back to that group interview. There's usually anywhere between 4 and 10 people in a group interview because all the departments a lot of times will come together and they will interview you in small groups and you'll move from group to group to group asking the same kinds of questions, and then all of those people will debrief afterwards and then come up with a consensus of the top 3 or 4 that they want to pull back in for a one-on-one interview. So a group interview is a quick way for employers to weed people out. So again, it's really important that our clients understand that they've got to go into that group interview as strong as possible. Again, writing down names, handshakes, looking people in the eye, remembering their names to say again in a conversation, and then making sure that they're listening to the types of questions that are being answered and be prepared to answer them. So that's the group interview. Then when we get to the one-on-one interview, many times in office buildings, you'll meet with an HR person, then you'll go meet with someone in that department, and you may meet with somebody else that you'd be working with for a lot of people. But that's still just one-on-one, different than the group interview where there'll be more and more people and you'll be moving from group to group. So in that one-on-one interview, there's 2 different types of questions, the traditional interview questions and more of the behavioral type of questions. We suggest that during this time of the session is to review the traditional questions and review the behavioral. It's really important for the coaches to be able to model this. So one person be the client and one person be the employer, and actually go through 3 or 4 of the top questions that are on this list. And again, provide appropriate answers so your clients can see what the right answer would really be. Don't expect them to be able to come up with the answers. Make sure that you're able to provide that model of what a good answer will be. The one thing that we know almost in every single interview, and this is when we suggest that you have them practice, is the question that says, tell us about a time that you had a negative experience at work or you had some obstacle that you needed to overcome. Please tell me how you overcame that and what did you do in that situation. Very typical behavioral question that comes up all the time. So make sure your clients have an answer to that because everyone always asks that one. And that would be like the elevator speech. They need to get that down. They need to write it down. So you might have them do some processing and thinking about that and then come back and write down some key points of what that was. And remember, they may say, well, I haven't had a job in 4 or 5 years. They've done something within any situation where they've had something that they've had to struggle and overcome. And remember, the most important part of this question is that you state the negative and then very quickly move into what you did to change that and into the positive. Remind them to never dwell on the negative and go on, but to only look at the positive and really cover that part of it. So, okay? So those are some of the questions. So again, by you modeling those, so take 3 or 4. And then what you want to do is to break into small groups. And these small groups are really important because, again, just like the elevator speech, not everybody feels comfortable in front of a group talking and answering these kinds of questions. So the smaller the group, the better. And work in a triad type of a situation where one of you is the employer, one of you is the observer, and one is the interviewer. So again, your 3 clients, one would be an employer, one would be an observer, and one would be the interviewer. And the coaches are actually circulating and observing and giving input when they need to. But in this small group, what I usually do is I usually take the sample interview questions and I ask one group to focus just on the interview questions, the sample traditionals, and then I ask another group to focus on the behavioral. And then we come back and we trade those back and forth and ask people to share some of their answers within both of those. And then we flip-flop. And so that we have people doing the behavioral that did the traditional and vice versa. So then they all have practice within that. You can set that up however you want. But again, make sure that they're answering and have both types of questions. I usually take the handout itself and I circle like 3 or 4 or 5 of the ones that I think are the most common questions. And those of you that are in HR know the ones that you typically ask in that situation. But just make sure, again, that you give them that chance to process and do that. And again, allow them the time that they need to come up with those answers. So we'll take a break here, and then when we come back, we'll continue with those groups and those interview questions and then go to our close.